Hey, what's going on YouTube? My name's Kevin, aka Gospel Gambit, and welcome back to my chess channel. In today's episode, we get a grudge match between our very first opponent in this series, Nordveter, in the exact same opening from that very first video. It's going to be an Evans Gambit game. I'm excited to show it to you guys. We do go down a very similar line to start with some improvements. So I'm hoping that I can show you guys where I made improvements from that first game as he beat us on the black side of the pieces. And maybe we can snag a win back from him in this developing rivalry on Lichess. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get into the game. Alrighty, so as in this game, we had a similar opening to our first game with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4, bishop to c5, and then b4, the Evans Gambit. If you want to know a little bit more about the Evans Gambit and certain tactics and different opening ideas from it, go back and check out my first video as we do a light dive into the opening itself, as well as different openings that can come out if black does not go bishop to c5. So in this game, Nordveter takes the pawn on b4. We immediately strike back with c3, bishop back to c5, and d4. This is following the exact same line that we had in the first match versus each other. And after takes, castle, and d6, pawn takes, and bishop back to b6. Now in my first video, I broke down a couple different options that white has here to continue. You have knight to c3, d6, or correction, d5, queen to b3, and as well as h3, avoiding some pins that go on to white's queen here. In the first game, we did play d5 as that's what I've been studying, and after knight to e7, which was a move that I wasn't very aware of at the time, I ended up playing bishop to b2. And as we can see here, and as we saw in the first video breakdown, that is the most played move. Almost 25% of games go down that line from this opening. But when we looked at the engine, we found that e5 is the best way to keep an advantage and keep pressing the attack. As we're castled, we want to break open the center here, as black is still at least 2 moves away from castling, and 3 moves if he wants to go to his queen side. So, learning from our first game, we did end up playing e5, and after black takes, we take back with our knight, and black played knight to f6, which is the most played move as well in this line. And this is where I had my first think. So this was kind of as far as I'd gotten with reviewing that first game. Wasn't expecting to see this opening this quickly again here on this account. So I had a few ideas in my mind, as you're going to see. I'll turn on the engine here in a second. But we have the move d6 was the very first thought that I had. Forcing black to take back the pawn either with his pawn or with his queen, opening our attacks on the f7 pawn, where black is very weak right now with our knight and bishop pair. Also, what crossed my mind is knight takes f7. Now, you might think, oh, isn't that just sacrificing a piece? Well, after king takes, we have some ideas here with the d6 push after we've already sacrificed the bishop, as that push comes with check, and we could pick up the knight here on e7. And if we turn on the engine, those were really the 2 main moves that I thought about in this position, trying to kind of do a deep dive into what those continuations would look like. As you can kind of see here, there's actually a few different moves that the engine suggests. I ran the engine on Lichess. This is Stockfish 16, not the newest Stockfish, but pretty much I think it's the second newest version. And I ran it to depth 51 in this position. And if you run it early on at lower depths, it does like this move, knight takes f7. But as you can see, as it goes further and further into its thinking. It doesn't like that sacrifice as much, and the reason is that it leads to a line where black is able to trade the queens off and get his pieces developed. Maybe g4, d2, and black is able to kind of bring his pieces into the game where we are still underdeveloped here. So our attack kind of fizzles out a bit as we both now rush to get the rest of our pieces onto the board. With the queens off, it is a lot harder to attack black's position. So, in the game, and as you can see, moves I didn't even think about here. So queen to b3 is the top recommended move. And if we play queen b3, there's a whole slew of ideas here. And you can kind of run through them yourself if you'd like. But black is able to get a lot of his minor pieces out. His queen is still relatively safe and is playing an active role in its defense. Black does get the option to castle, but it keeps the queens on the board and it allows for attacking opportunities for white. And as you can see, a3, bishop a3 is also an option here. Rook e1 right away, setting up some attacks on this e7 knight with different ideas of rook to e1. Bishop is going to come out here to a3, putting a lot of pressure. And once our knight moves here from the e5 square, this knight might be pinned to a rook if black does end up castling. So a lot of complications. As you can see, there is a lot of moves. d6, which is the move I ended up playing in this game, is on the list here. They're all relatively equal in strength, and all lead to very different continuations. a4 is another idea, and that's also seen in a few other lines of the Evans Gambit, where we're putting pressure on this bishop that is on b6. Now in some other variations, it's usually in the decline variations. Usually if black doesn't take this pawn and comes back, we threaten to trap black's bishop here, and black usually has to decide to push his a pawn 1 or 2 squares. And we'll see more of that as we get into the Evans Gambit decline later on in this challenge. So I'm going to turn the engine off. We do end up going with d6 here. And this forces black to decide if he wants to take with the pawn or the queen. Now, I was hoping that black would take with the pawn. And after I was kind of thinking about it, I couldn't really see where this line took me with this knight takes f7 variation. I couldn't calculate deep enough, and this d6 position seemed to be more straightforward in a sense, as we will go into it. But black has this option of taking with the queen, and this can lead to a queen trade, which I thought I had to initiate here, as I thought if I took the queen, black takes back, and I would be able to pick up the pawn. Now that is what happens in the game, but black does not have to allow that to occur. In fact, it much rather likes white to take and offer a check to black before it goes into any sort of queen trade. And let's say after king goes back, we defend our knight, and if black trades, then we still have an equal position, but black is going to go uncastled, and both of his rooks right now are kind of stuck in their starting corners, as we'll probably be able to flood the board with our pieces and continue the pressure onto black. But in the game, I did not go for this bishop takes, and instead, after queen takes, as you can see, the a4, queen a4 check, it does not want to trade queens. As you can see, the engine really wants to keep the queens on the board, as, like I said, having queens on allows for a lot of different attacking opportunities. But instead, I end up taking the queen, initiating the queen trade there on d6. And after takes back, I went knight takes f7. And as you can kind of see, the evaluation is slowly starting to go down. And what I missed after this calculation was that black has the move d5, cutting off our bishop from our knight here. I couldn't tell. I thought after I made this move, knight takes f7, I suddenly realized that black could push this pawn. Now in the game, he does not end up doing that, but I started trying to calculate what that would maybe look like, and it just seems that we're going to be giving up 2 minor pieces here if our knight isn't able to get out of this corner for a rook. And if you can count the pawns right now, black has 5. We have 4, so we'd be giving up 2 pieces and a pawn for a rook, which is not ideal. But we do get bailed out here as black plays rook to f8. I was a bit surprised by this move, as right now I'm threatening take back on d6 with my knight for check and pushing black's king into the center of the board, as black would not have the option to move to f7. So after takes, black ends up going towards the middle of the board here, and we bring our rook to d1. In this position, we have a couple different options. We could bring our bishop out to defend our knight, and that's what the computer likes, but rook d1 is also completely fine here. It sets up some discovered attacks on black's king, and kind of puts black in a little bit of a bind here, as some of his pieces are awkwardly placed. Black decides to go with knight to d5 in this position. And as you kind of can see on the, actually can't see just yet, but if I scroll down here on the bottom, you can see I had about 4 minutes and 40 seconds left on the clock here to my opponent had about 10 minutes left. Just a lot of having to calculate different moves here. And this move itself, I should have really just brought this knight back, which is the best move, as black is attacking the f2 pawn with his bishop and rook. And by moving the knight back to e4, a retreating move, which is always kind of tough to find a bit, I find sometimes those aren't the easiest moves to spot. But by bringing this knight back, we do end up pinning this knight by black to his king, and we can start delving into some tactical ideas of possibly winning this knight from black. But instead, I was also calculating certain ideas where takes, and then getting my bishop out to support this knight, or even takes, and then coming back after black. But that's a losing line in general. So I end up take here. As you can see, our advantage kind of evaporates after that move. But then black goes for this for this aggressive take on f2. And starting to become into time trouble, I do miss the best move in this position. As you can see, we should be pretty much winning almost an entire rook, if not more, according to the computer's evaluation. For whatever reason, I was getting scared. I was seeing ghosts in the closet. I wasn't seeing the correct tactics. I thought rook f1 was checkmate because of a double check on our king, not realizing that this rook is undefended. So if black does end up, let's say we make a random move and black does play a double check, we can simply just capture the rook. And so I started kind of seeing ghosts in the closet, and I had thoughts of he had certain windmill ideas, which black does. In a sense, he's threatening right now rook to d2, coming with check and picking up our other rook. And so, not thinking too clearly here, I missed the obvious move of bringing our knight back, another retreating move. So the 2 moves ago, it was knight to e4. Now in this position, we have knight to c4. And if black ends up, so I'll show you on the board here, if we bring our knight back, and let's say the rook comes over, trying to do a discovered attack on our rook, we have knight takes b6. And it's important that this move comes with check, otherwise black would be able to win our rook here on d1. So after a line, something like this, black is just completely lost. I mean, he'd be down a full rook and whatnot. So this simple move, not so simple, but this simple retreating move, knight to c4, stops any sort of discovered attacks along our king here on g1. Now in the game, I end up sidestepping these checks that I was seeing down the g1 to b6 diagonal, and by doing so, giving up almost my entire advantage. So after this, black ends up taking my bishop on d5. Now I find one of the retreating moves back to e4, attacking the rook and pinning the knight to black's king. Black drops his rook back to defend his knight, and I played what I thought was a fairly straightforward developing move. Right now, almost all my pieces are in the back rank. Not the best look when you're supposed to be the attacker in a position or in an opening. And I would really like to get my second rook into the game, as well as my bishop attacking along some of these diagonals that are wide open now. So I thought, all right, we'll bring our knight into the game here, bring another attacker on black's knight, which is pinned. So right now we are threatening to win this knight. And we're one step away from connecting our rooks. And black steps up to defend his knight. And as you can see, I am starting to get into some serious time trouble. I'm below a minute here, so I'm at 40 seconds. And in this position, I could have just played the simple move of developing my bishop out. And let's say after trades, repin the knight. We're going to repick up this knight, and it's a fairly equal endgame. We're down a pawn, but black's king is wide open in the middle. So that could have been one way to continue going. That would have led to some equality. Instead, I play this move, knight to a4, attacking black's dark squared bishop. I was thinking if I could get rid of this dark squared bishop, it would allow my dark square bishop to have a lot more free reign along these dark square diagonals, and it opens up the c file for my rook to come into the game. Black develops his light square bishop, which makes sense. We trade, and he ends up taking with his knight instead of the pawn, which I kind of expected the pawn. I'm not sure if that's a blunder. It's not a blunder. I thought he was going to take with the pawn, opening up his rook for pressure along the a file, as well as some sideways pressure here with his rook. But he ended up taking with his knight. We develop our bishop to, I would have loved to have this f4 square, kind of cutting off some of these retreating moves that black's king has, as he wants to kind of get tucked away in that b8 square. But unfortunately, black's rook is taking out a couple of the key squares in our position. And after this move, black decides to double the rooks. Now, what's his idea here? Well, he wants to threaten possible mating ideas along the f file, as well as just the classic rook battery is usually powerful, but it misses the tactic of rook to d6. And this picks up a full piece. Now, normally, I feel like I'd be able to convert these positions. We're up a full piece, minus a pawn. But I am under 20 seconds at this time. We have 10-second increment, but fortunately, my tactical prowess is just not there yet. Black jumps his knight into d5, attacking the dark squared bishop. Now, since our rook is off this back rank, we do have some back rank vulnerability. With the dark squared bishop, though, we are able to guard the g1 square. So after throwing in a check and dropping our dark squared bishop back, I felt very comfortable in this position, but at the same time, I was living off the 10-second increment, as I've been sitting at 20 seconds for a while. So some of the ideas that I had in this position was to get rooks to the 7th rank and try to get my knight here to d6, putting some more pressure on that b7 pawn, as well as restricting black's ability to ever move towards the middle of the board again with his king, as his king is cut off from the rest of the game. After knight to f4, I, for some reason, only saw this knight jump into e2 with the fork on both of my pieces, and in doing so, completely missed that black is attacking my knight, attacking my rook here on e6. So I continued with my idea. The computer just says if you just bring up the knight to the 7th rank, even if black jumps in to the e2 square, we can just bring our rook over. And after b6, knight to d6, attacking black's rook. Let's say rook comes down here. We can take. Sorry. And we're able to pick up black's other knight. But I blundered in this position. And I got ahead of myself. Instead of bringing my rook to the 7th rank in order to dominate black's pieces, I jumped my knight into d6, completely losing all of our initiative as well as any sort of advantage I had. And in this game, black takes, I take, he takes, and now we're just down a clean pawn in an endgame where we do have the bishop versus knight, but we are way down on the clock. Our opponent still has about 4 minutes left on his clock, and I'm living off the 22 seconds that I have right now. So the game kind of continues, and it ends with a fork that I miss here, and I resign after black takes on f4. So we had a grudge match. We got a lot better position than we did in the first game. If you want to go back and watch that first game, you can kind of see how we improved on our opening. So we're slowly getting better, and hopefully we'll get to see Nordveter again. We were about the same rankings as now. He was about 1900 the first time we played. I was still provisional around 1806, I believe. And in this game, we were up to 1836. We were up about 30 elo points. We jump to the tail of the tape. You can see it's a crazy game back and forth with black having a slight advantage in the early game after I traded the queens on d6. But we had plenty of opportunities that we should have capitalized there in the middle game with giant spikes of +3 to even +5 going towards the end game. So hopefully we get to see this opponent again, and hopefully we get to play him in an Evans Gambit for the 3rd time. I'm looking forward to it myself. He or she's been a super strong opponent to play, and has been giving me some fun games here on the white side of the pieces. So if you guys enjoyed the game today, please like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you on episode 6.